Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. So on the 21st of April 2025, as part of a speech that Netanyahu was delivering, he made this statement with regards to the Khilafah, and he spoke about working to ensure that a Khilafah is not established, and that he will be the one that stands up to any attempts for it to be established, and that he is making progress in doing so. When we hear or when we read about such statements from Netanyahu, there are a few points that we need to consider, and I will discuss those points in this presentation, inshallah ta'ala. So, the first point that we need to understand is that whenever Netanyahu makes such a statement, we have to examine and understand who Netanyahu is. Netanyahu is merely a mouthpiece for the US. So whenever Netanyahu makes such a statement, we have to assume that there is nothing in his statement that is contrary or that contradicts what the US has to say. There is nothing that contradicts the US's foreign policy. In fact, what he says is a reflection of the US's foreign policy. What he says is in line with the US's foreign policy. And this is not just with regards to Netanyahu, but actually his entire team and the entire Zionist entity altogether are actually just an extension of the US's foreign policy. They are a vehicle for the US to ensure that it can achieve its strategic objectives in the area. So whenever we hear Netanyahu making such bold statements, we always need to assume and conclude that what he is saying is what his masters in the US would have given him the green light and the blessings to say, and that suits them because it is in line with their foreign policy. So when he's talking about the Khilafah and not wanting it to be established, then that is actually the US also saying that, and the US's foreign policy in the region, that they also don't want a Khilafah to be established. So that's the first point. The second point is then we have to ask ourselves, why is the US so concerned with the rise of Khilafah? What's the big deal? You know, there's so many other religions, there's so many other cultures, there's so many even governments which have got a style of governance that is, mixed with religion, if you like. So what's the problem with Khilafah? Well, the US knows that the Khilafah will stand up to it. It will stop it from bullying and terrorizing and victimizing the Muslims and the Muslim lands and the Muslim countries and the Muslim world entirely. Because unlike other religions, unlike other ways of life, the Khilafah will see it as an obligatory from an Islamic point of view. This will be something that is obligatory upon the Muslims to defend their brothers and sisters, to ensure that their lands are not stolen, to ensure that their resources are not stolen. So it knows that this Khilafah, if it was to rise and if it was to be established, it will stop the bullying of the US. Now, it's not just about the fact that it will stop it from doing that to the Muslims. The idea is that the US is in the Muslim world specifically to achieve certain things. So it wants to take out the oil, the minerals, it wants to take their land, it wants to take their resources. And what will happen if a state rises and is there to stand up to the US? It will be seen by the US as a direct competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a state that is stopping it from achieving its strategic objectives. The US goes around the world killing and looting and um, causing all sorts of mayhem, because it wants to ensure that those powerful capitalists, those powerful um, uh, organizations are benefiting from the damage that they are creating in those countries. So the rise of the Khilafah is something that is going to be problematic for the US, and so that is number two. Number three, why the fear? Why is Netanyahu making such a statement? Because anybody who has read history would know that post World War II, one would have assumed that the Muslim countries are already colonized. The immediate military invasion and occupation of the Muslim world happened. And so, what's the problem? And what people need to realize is, yes, the US has actually succeeded in colonizing the Muslim world, physically, militarily, and geographically, by splitting its land and creating nation states. That has happened. Okay. However, what it knew that it needed to do was it wanted the people to also be sold on the Western way of life. So it didn't just want to implant its um, puppets in order to rule by force. It actually wanted an entire society to go along with its lifestyle. It wanted to have its ideology being the most dominant in those countries. And what it has failed to do is has failed in its cultural invasion of the Muslims. And when you fail in your cultural invasion of the Muslims, and you ask yourself why, what you'll find in the Muslim world is that the Muslims are clinging onto Islam. And not only are they clinging onto Islam from a individual spiritual point of view, but they actually want to live in an Islamic society. They actually want to be governed by Islam. And every time something like the escalations and the genocide in Gaza takes place, you'll see that actually the Muslims do not want to be split from their brothers and sisters across the border. They don't want their brothers and sisters being murdered. They do want a government that will actually do something and not base its political actions on the nation state model. They are going to go out there and protest and say that we want actual military intervention in the Muslim world. They are going to go out there and say that we want the Islamic solution for what's happening in Gaza. And so what we find is that there's so many different examples of that the sentiment in the Muslim world revolves around the fact that the Muslims still want Islam. And this is what they fear. They fear that they were not able to sell the Western way of life to the Muslim world, and that there is quite a lot of potential anytime soon for an uprising or a change in the governance and the politics to take place in the Muslim world. And it brings us on to the last point, which is, what is the barrier currently to the establishment of the Khilafah? The Ummah, the politicians, the influentials, the scholars, there's so many sincere people, the activists, the army generals, there's so many sincere people amongst the Ummah that are trying to make change. And the obstacle that stands in the way of that real change at the moment is not only Netanyahu, it's not only the US, it's not only the US's foreign policy. But if you think about it, when Netanyahu comes out and makes such a statement, and none of the leaders in the Muslim world come out and condemn it, come out and reject it, come out and oppose it, it means that they are actually in agreement with what he is trying to do. And when you're in agreement, the reality is they're not just in agreement, they are actually working with him. The intelligence services are working closely together. The the efforts, the money, the politics that is being put in for all of these treacherous regimes and the US and the Zionist entity all together to come together in order to attempt to stop this Khilafah from being established, they are all working together on this. And currently in the Muslim world, the only barrier to this are those treacherous regimes. Had we had a change of those regimes, had we been able to topple those regimes, had the influentials and the army generals and the scholars and the soldiers, as soon as there is enough momentum and a real change takes place in those societies, then you'll see that those regimes are going to crumble. We know as Muslims that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us that this will happen, and they know, working together, the intelligence services working together, they know that it's close. And so when Netanyahu comes out and says this, he's also kind of giving those treacherous regimes a reminder: keep an eye on your societies, because there's a lot of work for a change in regime taking place. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring about this change. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with the re-establishment of the Khilafah and allow us to work for it, inshaAllah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ruin the plans of these treacherous rulers who are working hand in hand with the US and the likes of Netanyahu. أقول قولي هذا. استغفر الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.